Hello, and welcome to another Old Scams and Shiny New Packages podcast. On these podcasts, we use 20th century experiences and ideas to better understand 21st century scams, risks, and potential approaches. My name is John P. Raberger, and I'm here with my podcasting collaborator, Don Wood. Hello, Don.
Hello, John.
Today, I would like to talk about an emerging scam area, and that's cryptocurrency. And according to the FBI, this is a growth area in scams for several reasons, not the least of which is that it appears to be fairly misunderstood. And so I'd like to start out with a TV show. And the TV show is a Netflix show called Ozark. In it, Jason Bateman stars as Marty Byrde, and Marty Byrde's job is to launder money for a Mexican drug cartel. In the show, he's always getting in trouble with somebody, with the FBI, with competitors, with his boss, and he's always trying to figure out new ways to launder money. So, as a thought exercise, and I know it's a TV show, I know it's not real, but as a thought exercise, what would be the best tool that we could think of to help out Marty Byrde launder money? And what would the attributes be? In preparation for this session, I thought of a few of them. One is it would have to be anonymous. You wouldn't want your name to be on it anywhere. And another would be is that you don't want it controlled by the government. Otherwise, the government can surveil it and keep track of it and have laws associated with it. So you don't want the government involved. You also want ease of movement across international borders. So if you're laundering money in the US, you can easily move money to Europe or Canada or anywhere else in the world. And so you'd basically want it to work across the internet. You would also have to have confidence that if you laundered millions of dollars into this system, that it would be around tomorrow. So you'd have to have confidence in the system to some degree. You'd also want what I call ease of convertibility. You want to be able to change it from one type of money to another, like from a euro to a won to a real to a dollar to something else easily and without at great cost, because you may not get all your money in one form of currency, so you want convertibility. And the last thing I think you would want is usefulness in the ability to use it across multiple criminal domains. So if you use it in money laundering or ransomware or some kind of dark web activity, you'd want to be able for it to be useful in multiple domains and not just in one domain. That's basically the problem with cash, is it's useful in one domain for drug deals, but it's not useful if you want to buy, 1 million credit card data entries across the internet. So, in my opinion, cryptocurrencies meet all these requirements. And that's why I don't think it's surprising that crypto has now become extremely popular for criminals. If you see things in the national news about ransomware or somebody being kidnapped, they typically want the payment in Bitcoin. And I don't think that's an accident. And I also think that there are other factors going on in the world that contributed to the rise of cryptocurrency's usefulness in the criminal world. And I think, for example, one of those is that when we were growing up, speaking of last century, at least when I was growing up, there was this concept called a numbered Swiss bank account. Yes. And it was in the movies and TV shows. Now, I never had a numbered Swiss bank account, but in all the TV shows and movies, that was it was magic. Yes. Once you had a numbered Swiss bank account, you had anonymity and you could hide your money in this place. Well, basically, Switzerland had a lot of international pressure to get rid of those numbered Swiss bank accounts. And essentially, in 2018, they basically disappeared. So you can't have the good old numbered Swiss bank account that you had in all the James Bond movies in the past. So people were looking around for something else that would serve a similar purpose, but maybe be more internet enabled. And I think that's another reason why cryptocurrency has taken off in terms of popularities. What do you think, Don?
I'm thinking that once again, technology has drained the romance out of things on Earth, including the Swiss bank account.
Yeah.
To have a Swiss bank account just really sounds like a badge of honor. It just sounds fun. It's Switzerland, it's overseas, there's the Alps, and probably good coffee and cheese, and your millions. And now it's crypto. Okay, crypto really doesn't have that flesh and blood romance to it, but here we are.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing, too, is I was looking up as to why things like cryptocurrency are so popular. And I was actually talking to someone we both know about this, who's a young man, and he's very highly educated. And he got into cryptocurrency, and it was interesting to talk to him. And after further research, I found that cryptocurrency is highly popular among young people, specifically Gen Z, millennials. About half of them have some kind of cryptocurrency. And a big majority of these people, according to surveys, believe that the conventional financial systems favor older generations. Based on discussions with some of these younger people, I don't think they really understand how the government works, but I don't think that matters. I don't think they trust the system. And more specifically, I don't think they trust us as baby boomers. I think there is a basis for that mistrust of us.
Yes, yes.
If you talk about things like federal deficits
Right.
and how essentially baby boomers have engineered the political system and to some degree the economy to benefit us. For example, mortgage interest is deductible on your taxes, but rental payments are not. I mean, that's a law that was passed and it's a popular law, but that's probably because baby boomers are more likely to have a house. And if you're really young, you're less likely to be really honest with you. So I think the popularity of cryptocurrency among young people to some degree is a reflection of the younger people's distrust in us, and that's driving some of the non-criminal advocacy for it and one of the reasons that younger people are holding some of the cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I agree. And I too know people, young people who have crypto or have had it in the past. And like so much of what's happened in the past 30 years since America Online came into our lives, and we have the internet now as a utility mostly, the digital advancements in our world have changed currency. It's changed everything. It's changed photographs. It's changed letters. It's changed how you pay a bill and so on and so forth. It's changed maps. And it just makes sense that it's changing money.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to the value of cryptocurrency in the criminal world, I think there's two other elements where it's very useful. And that is one, if you're trying to hide wealth from taxation authorities that have wealth taxes. For example, like some European countries have tax on wealth, not on income like the United States does, but on tax on basically your assets. If you can move some of those assets into a very difficult to discover cryptocurrency, then I think there's an incentive to do so. And I have to believe some of that wealth or some of the value of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, is being driven by people trying to hide stuff. And the other one I can think of is people trying to hide stuff in anticipation of a divorce.
Oh,
And
that's good.
let's say you're anticipating a divorce from your soon to be ex, and you're trying to hide some of that. And according to what I read, there's basically 700,000 divorces a year in the US, approximately. And let's do the back of the envelope and say that 10% of those are trying to hide some type of money because they don't want their ex to benefit from the money that they think they've earned. And let's say that they are trying to hide $100,000 each. If you're only trying to hide, $1,000, it's not worth the hassle. But if you're trying to hide six figures, it might be worth the hassle to move some of the money into cryptocurrency. That means that every year people are trying to hide $7 billion. Let's round that down for conservative figure to $5 billion a year. That means there's $5 billion a year of demand for cryptocurrency just on people trying to hide it from their potential soon to be exes and the system and things like that. And you can also hide it fairly efficiently, although that's getting harder and harder now. So I think there's several criminal use cases, and those are just the ones I could think about as preparing for this podcast.
One would need to be pretty tech savvy to invest directly in a particular cryptocurrency, it would seem to me, because it involves a wallet, a digital wallet. Here I'm getting way off past my base of knowledge, but the costs of banking in crypto, of keeping money in crypto, does seem to be much more difficult than simply having a bank account. I mean, what happens if you lose your password, for example, or your so-called digital wallet? You sign in one morning and it's not there, kind of thing. So there's a lot of risk on the infrastructure part of cryptocurrency that you don't have necessarily with real money. On the other hand, crypto, like everything else, will evolve, and it may become simpler in the future, quite simple, almost like with an Apple MacBook, you can use your fingerprint to turn on your computer and get to your bank. So that's in the future, but the young people are into it, and I would say, kind of place your bets where the young people are going.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you that I think it has some technology aspects to it. Although, if you go online, there's plenty of people online on YouTube and other places that are more than willing to help you learn how to use it
Mhm.
because they want to be the advisor of you for helping you invest in crypto. The so-called crypto bros, I think is the slang for that type of term. And if you think you're going to lose the $500,000 for your soon to be ex and her extra sharp lawyer who's going to take you for everything, it might be worth it to take the risk of thinking about crypto or at least exploring the option and see what you can do with it, especially if you have relatively few other options. So the other interesting thing to me is to compare cryptocurrencies to the euro. Now, see, to me, the euro is fascinating as a currency because it's almost the opposite of crypto. In that, for example, the euro is not supported by any single country. In other words, it's not the German euro or the Italian euro or the French euro. It's the European Union euro. And because of that, it's essentially supported only by paperwork and agreements and treaties that countries have between each other to be part of this group and create this currency. And it's not convertible to gold. It's not on the gold standard. It's a fiat currency like the dollar is and things like that. And it's also physical and digital. I mean, you can get euros and put them in your pocket. It also, unlike Bitcoin, for example, there is no cap on the amount of currency, which can contribute to inflation, but it can also allow the economy to grow and be supplied with money on an ongoing basis to serve as a currency. So you can also invest in euros. You can invest in interest rates related to euros. You can invest in euro future contracts. So to me, it's almost like the euro is the opposite of Bitcoin. It has nothing but government agreements behind it.
Hmm.
It is physical and digital. Which would you rather have, euros or Bitcoin? For me, I'd rather have euros because I can take those euros and I can spend them almost anywhere in the world. It's not quite as pervasive as the dollar, but it is the second most convertible currency in the world. I mean, if you want to take it to Singapore or Lima, Peru, or wherever you want, you can take those euros and convert them into local currency fairly easily. I dare say that's much more of a challenge for Bitcoin or Ethereum or Dogecoin or your Trump coin or whatever else you want to think about. So to me, it's an interesting thought exercise to compare the euro to Bitcoins.
And of course, Bitcoin is just one of how many cryptos are out there, John? There's probably hundreds, thousands of individual coins.
Right. Because one of the attractions of this type of cryptocurrency is individuals can essentially create their own. Now, it's not in the true sense similar to Bitcoin because Bitcoin has basically a whole big infrastructure underneath it. What people can do is create what's called a token that rides on somebody else's infrastructure, but they essentially turn it into their own coin. And there's a bunch of people, popular people who have done it, like Kanye West has done it, and Donald Trump has done it, and Caitlyn Jenner has done it. So it's possible to create your own. It's not easy, but it's possible to do so. I mean, I honestly think it's a big mistake to invest in these other individual coins, but there is the option to do so.
You remember that Paul McCartney song? You were just reminding me of it, talking about the euro. Now, this is 40 years ago, but the song was called The Pound. It starts out, the pound is sinking. The pound is sinking. And it goes on, and he names almost every currency in Europe. The pound is sinking. The yen is rising. The shekel is falling, which hardly seems surprising, that kind of thing. So back then, the financial pages were full of these different currencies. Every country
Sure,
had their own currency, and I
sure.
sort of miss that. Now it's become the euro, which is
Yeah,
kind of an airless, featureless, kind of vague thing, the euro, which spans the entire continent, but really doesn't have much of an identity the way McCartney sang. But yes, the euro is the mostly the European currency. And I'm wondering whether at some point when the histories are written, crypto will then become what the euro is today in terms of wiping out all of the individual currencies. Now we're talking, 25, 30 years from now. But if you had asked somebody 150 years ago to believe that you could take a photograph and watch it develop before your very eyes, they thought you were crazy. So I'm putting a pin in the crypto world as something that I think could be very, very exciting in the next 30 years. But risky right now, full of the possibility of scams. And as a personal matter, for people who aren't tech savvy like me, holding on to a Bitcoin and knowing what to do when you try to sign in and you can't get your password to work, that's really a barrier of entry. If they could solve that, it might take off more than it has right now.
as we've prepared for this and talked about this podcast, I guess I'm bearish on crypto. And the evidence I have is the recent decrease in the value of Bitcoin. And my theory is that the FBI and other criminal investigative groups have gotten better at tracking it. And as support for that, I don't know if you remember back in 2021, there was this Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack where this pipe that supplies most of the gasoline products up and down the East Coast was hacked and they couldn't ship gas up and down. And they paid out like, I don't know, 75 Bitcoin, which is a lot of money. Apparently, the FBI recovered 85% of that money
Mm.
after the fact.
Hmm.
So I speculate that the falling value of Bitcoin in the last, I don't know, half year has been due to the fact that it's no longer as easily transported around the world anonymously as it was because essentially groups like the FBI have gotten better. Now, there are countries that make it harder for the FBI to do that. There are essentially countries that don't have strong anti-money laundering laws, like I think Monaco is one. I think that as long as a currency is so widely associated with criminal organizations, I think it's going to have a hard time becoming popularized beyond a very small group. And I have a hard time seeing how Bitcoin is not mostly used for criminals, by criminals, for criminals, because it just makes the most sense in terms of utility. Bottom line for potential listeners who are older, I would say, because you've asked me about this before, is to me, cryptocurrency is not inherently good or bad. It's just a tool, it's just a technology that can be used. But for most people, I think it's a big mistake to invest in cryptocurrency. I think there's a bunch of good reasons, not the least of which it does not have government support. All reputable currencies throughout history, it's had some type of government support. And I think people underestimate the value of that, especially if they're really young. I think it is frequently used by criminals. I think there's evidence to support that. There are also plenty of other investment options out there. If you want to invest in currencies, you can literally invest in all kinds of currencies literally around the world. And the last thing is based upon the discussions I've had, I'm not sure many people even know how cryptocurrency works. I don't think they understand the concept of blockchain. I think they may in the abstract, but the ones I've talked to invest in it, made money, and that's all they really care about. If it goes up in value, that's good. If it goes down, that's bad. And but otherwise, I'm not sure they really understand how it works at the core of it.
In 1964, if I have the date right, the government, the US government, stopped issuing silver coinage and went to some kind of an alloy, something that looked shiny and silvery but wasn't. And so those quarters and half dollars that were silver were quickly scooped up by collectors because they're on the way out. That was just part. I'm not an economic historian, but it just seems like that is just sort of just one of the waypoints on the journey to liberate currency from any particular valuable mineral or metal. So what we have now are currencies, the US currency, that isn't tied to anything that's valuable like a metal. It's more of a promise. This dollar can be used confidently when you go shopping. I think what the crypto people would say is because there is a limited number of crypto, I'm going to go with Bitcoin, it's the only one I'm even passively familiar with, but because there is a limited number and someday we'll mine it all, maybe in 100 years, you can't get any more of it. And because government hasn't started using crypto, except maybe one country, but even that country can't necessarily manipulate cryptocurrency. It's just there, international, a series of ones and zeros, and it can't be inflated. Now, do you think that's right?
I think that might be true in that, for example, we talked about various analogies in the past to Bitcoin. And to me, any currency is only as valuable as the usefulness and faith people have in it. I mean, one we talked about is like cigarettes being used in prisons. Well, why are they valuable in prison, not elsewhere? Because the people in prison see them as a potential currency and store of value. So it's whatever people say it is. But cryptocurrency can have that value, but anything can have that value. I mean, we have little pieces of paper in our wallets that are valuable to us, even though they're just literally pieces of paper. Well, why is a piece of paper in your wallet more valuable, but a piece of paper, any other piece of paper not nearly as valuable? Because we think it is. So, yes, cryptocurrency can be of value, but so can anything else that we as a society attach value to it. And like I said, I think one of the core issues is younger people don't trust the system. They jumped on it because it's cool. And it's cool among criminals because they trust it and they can move it around and they can hide it from the government and they can move it across borders a whole lot easier than gold or diamonds or euros or dollars. And I think it's useful for criminals. And I think that's why it's widely used by criminals. And I think it's speculative and hopeful by young people. But I also think it's more or less a fad. And the fact that you're having all these individuals create their own coins on top of the infrastructure because they all kind of want to be and make a lot of money off it, I think that's actually going to wash everything out in the end. If you're a really believer in it, go for it. It's just like you could invest in any other material or any other mineral you think is going to be super popular in the future because of its emerging importance in society. For example, there's a mine in North Carolina that has the ability to dig out superfine silicon. Now, this superfine silicon is really useful in the computer industry because they don't have to refine it as much to make silicon wafers, which are key parts of computers. So had you been wandering around parts of North Carolina looking at the sand in the ground, you'd say, oh, so this is no value. But once you understand the value of it to the high-tech process, you go, wow, this is enormously valuable because other people think it's valuable. And so crypto to me is just like that. It's valuable because other people think it's valuable, not because it has some inherent benefit to it. And if no criminals use crypto, would it be as valuable? I don't think so.
Well, of course, the US dollar has been the choice among criminals. It's almost always, $1 million for some nefarious act. So the dollar it's tainted because it's the number one currency in the world, and that's what people have been using for various nefarious activities. Okay, now here's another. I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate. When we went from barter to coinage, that must have been a huge perceptual shift among people in villages who are used to trading. And then they went to a piece of metal, and that piece of metal was supposed to be an exchange. It was supposed to be worth something. And if you grew up trading cows for pigs or lumber, you're used to that. If all of a sudden you were told, well, we're not going to do that in this particular corner of the earth. We are going to use this coin, this round coin with a person's face on it, as the way to mediate exchanges. I think the first people who confronted that change must have had their minds blown, to see something, to believe in something like that could actually work. And that's what I'm thinking. Crypto may be in that same category right now.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from and that there is change happening. So it would not be surprising if change looks like crypto and people who suddenly lived their lives based on number of pigs and chickens and cows suddenly were told that this piece of metal in their pocket was equal to a certain number of chickens, cows, and pigs. That probably was a big event. But people have adapted to that, and there was the person's name. I mean, the picture on the coin, for example, in the Roman era, was designed to show that the government supported that coin because that was the emperor. on that coin. So it had government support, which just corroborates my view that the most useful currencies do have government support. Doubtless it blew their mind. Maybe my mind's being blown by Bitcoin and it hasn't quite sunk in yet. I don't know. I think most people who are boomers and older should basically avoid crypto.
I would agree with that, as thinking that crypto is going to be a medium of exchange widely accepted in our lifetime. I would say there's probably a 25% chance that that would happen, which is a pretty big 25%. But in the next lifetime, 2050 and onwards, it could be the next big thing, and maybe the next best thing. The libertarians love it because government's not involved and it's supposedly private, although as you mentioned, not always. It is part of the revolution in digital. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, well, hopefully our podcast will last that long into the next decades, but I wouldn't count on it. Anyway, I will wrap up this podcast by saying, don't be afraid because modern scams are just old scams in shiny new packages. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, John. That was fun.
That was.